Free and clear of the chatter from Wall Street, you're listening to Talking Stocks Over Beer, hosted by hedge fund veteran and newsletter writer Mike Alkin, who helps ordinary investors level the playing field against the pros by bringing you market insights and interviews with corporate executives and institutional investors. Mike sifts through all the noise of mainstream financial media and Wall Street to help you focus on what really matters in the markets. And now, here's your host, Mike Alkin.
Welcome. It is Monday, March 4th, 2019. Hope you had a good weekend. Mine was nice. I'm still licking my wounds. Islanders have had a tough stretch. Played four tough games over the last week. Losing 3 of them. I was at 2 of them. So I think I'm officially banned from going. My son and I were bad luck charms. They were in all games except Sunday. Yesterday they got rocked by the Flyers 4-1. But it's getting down nitty-gritty time. So it's that time of the year. Playoff hockey's around the corner. Buying for playoff positions are there. And it's a fun time of year. I spent time, though, it was my son's birthday this weekend, so we had a lot of family stuff we did. He officially became a teenager, so it was pretty exciting. Although I'm a bit shy of 6 foot, although I think I say I'm 6 foot. And here he just turned 13, and he's just a drop shorter than me. And his foot's about 4 sizes bigger than me. So gosh, it goes pretty quickly. And it's funny. We, he's evolving now into the period in his life where, early on kids play a lot of different sports. Some kids do, some kids don't like it. That's fine. It doesn't matter. But for him, he tried a little bit of everything. And then as his time has evolved, you could see what's of interest to him and what's not. For him, he loves football. And he's been playing football for many years. And I know I'm going to hear, how can you let your son play football? We're going to talk about that a lot today. But we're not going to talk about football. We're going to talk about lessons learned and how they apply in life and investing. But he's evolved into football and lacrosse. And it's been an interesting experience for me because some of the times, like he also has played basketball and baseball, and I knew for baseball was easy because I couldn't get him out of the car. He hated it. It bored the tears out of him. He said, "Dad, I just hate it." Okay, no problem. I am not that guy that says you have to play anything. But it's one of these things where when you join something, you finish it. I'm a believer in that. I'll give you the choice. Do you want to play it? Yes. Let's talk about it going in. Okay, you're not a big fan of something, but you think you want to play, your friends are playing. Okay, if you join, you're going to have to finish the season. Okay. Or so we've gone through a few of those, and when they're 7 and 8 and 9, it's like, okay, it's easy, you just push them there. But now kind of like I'm learning on the fly, right? I haven't had a teenage boy before. So we've gone through this with basketball this year he's played on a couple of teams, and he's very good in football. He's really good in lacrosse. He's not that good in basketball. He's just for whatever reason, it doesn't, I think because he's so tall for his age, I guess, not to make excuses, I guess he just doesn't, the coordination isn't there for what's required in basketball. And I think that's kind of made him feel a little awkward because he's not been awkward athletically before. So I've had to deal with him not wanting to play hoops midway through the season where he didn't want to play and trying to get him to go has been a battle. And I've had to pull out all the stops from what I learned as my experiences growing up as playing sports and how they transferred in life. And I always thought for me that subconsciously, for me, for those of you who are first listening to the podcast, you may not know, or you wouldn't know, but those of you who do listen know that I was an orphan growing up. I was raised by my grandparents from a very young age. And for me, and they were Italian and just generationally, just on a different planet. Good people, salt of the earth people, but just like real old fashioned, real strict. So for me, sports was my salvation. It was everything for me. And I just dove into it, and from playing and watching. I mean, back then, think about that. There were no video games. There were no distractions. It was the Mets, the Islanders, the Jets, the Knicks. I mean, I didn't like the Yankees and Rangers, but I watched them, and the Giants. But it was all, I could tell you every stat, I probably still can, about sports. So for me, I I got lost in it. It was it was it was great. And along the way, though, is you learn so many things, and I didn't realize what you were learning, and I didn't realize and how they transferred in my life as an investor. And so many of the lessons that I learned from playing football, and we're going to talk about that with our guest today, who is a 13-year Canadian Football League veteran, a multi-year All-Star, two-time Grey Cup champion, who had a wonderful, fabulous career. And he wrote a book about it, about the lessons he learned from one particular man, his coach. And he wrote a book that talked about that. And what I realized as I've evolved as an investor from getting into the business, so many things that I learned, the lessons of sport, translate over into investing subconsciously. But my guest put it in words. And it was remarkable to see this, because I've always felt that there was something there. Why did I know that? Why do I realize that if I just keep working harder and reading, and no matter how tired I am, I still got to get through this 10K. God, what a pain in the ass to get through these footnotes in this annual report. But I know that if I go through those footnotes, and I didn't know it at first, but if you have a checklist of things, and part of that checklist is to go through the minutia and practice it over and over, all of a sudden, that's where in the world of investing, you put together the checklist, and part of it is go through those footnotes. And then you go through those footnotes. You might not be knowing why when you're first starting. You're going through those footnotes of these reports and a little asterisk on the presentation. But as you're going through that, and over time, you realize that's where a lot of the beefy stuff is. And the discipline to have a mental checklist, have a written down checklist, have an organized game plan to know what you need to attack to find the weaknesses in what companies are saying. They bury the juicy stuff in the fine print, many of them. And as much of a pain in the neck it is to do it, a lot of people don't because of that. And you kind of realize that when it's a Wednesday afternoon and it's frigid outside late in the season and you want to throw up because it's been a 2.5 hour practice and you can't run anymore. And then you have to go run another 20 sprints or go run 2 miles afterwards. And you're thinking, I can't do this. But then you do it. It's very similar to reading a annual report at 1:30 in the morning, knowing that you've got to have the answer by 9:30 the next morning, because a company may have just put out their annual report with an earnings report, and the earnings report may have been really spectacular on the surface. But now it's your job to go and sift through what they really said, not what they presented as adjusted numbers. not what they presented as what they want you to see. But what did they put in the report that the regulators are going to see and look at and require? And you could sit there and say, oh, you know what? I just don't have it in me right now. Or you could say, there is no amount of information that's here that I'm not going to be able to kick its ass and go find it. Because I know as tired as I am, I know that I've just read 5 of these today, different companies, but I know this is necessary and I got to get it done. I'm going to get it done. And that stayed with me early on, whether it was the end of football practice or the end of hockey practice, where you were skating suicides, blue line to red line and red line to blue line and back and back and back, and you can't do it. You can't always do it. Now, again, you don't have to have been an athlete to be a good investor, but there are so many parallels that can be drawn, so many similarities. Teamwork, management questions. And one of the things I did throughout my whole career, and I don't know now, it's over 20 plus years, and I can't even begin to guess how many CEO and CFOs I've interviewed. Not interviewed for podcasts, but interviewed as an investor and sat across the table from them, from really large cap companies down to really small companies. And to really understand their business, to understand their management style. You know, when I do a meeting with a management team, you know, I have a mental bank of several hundred questions that I go through, and it's all different categories. I don't sit out there with my checklist talking to them, you know, but there is one. I have one that's written that I've always compiled, but it's in memory now. I look at it once in a while for a refresher. What are the important things that, you know, it's income statement, balance sheet, cash flow statement, all the working through the business model with them, understanding how the business works, educate me, what's the competitive landscape. But what are really important things? And you can't really ask this, but it's this mental checklist of management, leadership. Because one of the things you realize when you meet with management teams, and I'm guessing in the thousands now, across numerous industries, is they all get to that level, the C-suite level, the CEO, CFO level of a public company. They're all bright people. I can't say I've met many not bright people running companies, but they also are great salespeople. They may not have been a salesperson going up, but there's something charismatic about them to get to convince the board of directors that they should be the one to lead the company. And leadership is an entirely wide open field. It takes all shapes and sizes. It's amorphous. Not one size fits all. And I've seen so many different types of leaders. So when you talk to a management team, they're going to tell you what they want you to hear. And it may be true, or it may not be. They're going to say, what do you think, what they think you want to hear? And I've seen all sorts of leaders and managers. I've seen tyrannical ones. I've seen weak ones who let their management teams walk all over them. I've seen ones who just were too aggressive, fire people on a whim, ruled by fear. I've seen management teams that gave too much leeway to their direct reports. Some who were day-to-day micromanagers, others who weren't. But the one thing I think I've seen always is the ones who have been really successful, at least the ones that I've observed, ultimately are the ones who know how to develop the respect and trust of the people who work for them. Oh, sure, we know there are many CEOs who are running successful companies that are tyrannical, but the ones that really, I think, create fantastic value, that inspire people, are the ones who help grow other people. And we get to that when I'm talking to a management team. I'm listening to them. I'm asking them, how is the sausage made? How are projections made? Are you looking to Wall Street for guidance in terms of what expectations are for the company? And are you telling your senior management team, this is the growth we need to keep Wall Street happy, to keep our stock price elevated, and by golly, go down into the ranks and fire them up and tell them they need to deliver X% growth, because that's what we're going to do? Or have you set the tone where we're going to go out into the lowest level of the organization, at the front lines, the salespeople, and really have developed a process and a repeatable process for working with them and developing them, developing their talent to be able to dive into their markets, to be able to extract the most repeatable business from those salespeople? Have you given them the tools, the training to go out and competitively win business in their marketplace day after day, year after year? Have you given them the tools to understand their marketplace, to frame the size of the market, the growth rates, the competitive landscape, the pricing challenges, what the risks are to those growth rates? Are those people on the front lines equipped with that? Do they have their training camp? Do they get regular, repeatable practice at doing that, at improving their skill set? And then does that work its way up into the organization? And how much filtering down does that get done if the C-suite wants 10% growth? But down at the lower levels of the organization, are they trained? Are they equipped to understand what their business can grow? And it comes up less than that. Is that less than number squashed? Or is at the C-suite that number digested and communicated to investors? Are expectations reset? And if they are, what's being done to go out and help those people down in the field? Because if the numbers come from the top down, that can get tricky. You could have a whole organization that doesn't know how to do it. But by golly, Wall Street needs it. And that's where financial engineering occurs. It's where games play. I mean, we could spend 24 hours for the next 2 years going over what this stuff is. But there are things to think about when you as an investor, right? This podcast is for individual investors. And there are so many parallels to be drawn from athletics into investing. When you're listening to a management team give a presentation, we're going to talk about that today with my guest. We're going to bring him on. He had a very long 13-year career in the CFL. I randomly stumbled upon a book he wrote called Thank You, Coach. It's a bestseller on Amazon. I love sports books. I'm always inspired by them. I'm always looking for interesting, different ones. I came across this. Thank You, Coach, written by Angus Reid, 2-time Grey Cup champion, several-time All-Star, 13-year CFL career as a center. And as randomness would have it, the power of social media, one day I get a follow from Angus Reid. And I follow him back. Well, it turns out Angus Reid likes uranium. And he was intrigued by it. So he started following me. And I wrote him back. I said, hey, on direct message, I know you. You wrote a pretty good book. And one thing led to another. And we've developed a nice relationship. And he is one of the most inspiring people I've ever spoken with. I come across a lot of people throughout my career. But this guy has that it factor. He gets it. He put in words on paper what I've always kind of felt but didn't know how to articulate about how sports transcends life. And man, how it, if you are a leader, if you're a manager, if you're a salesperson, if you're an investor, what this guy has to say matters. So let's bring him on. Angus Reid, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Mike. It's a pleasure.
A good coach can change a game. A great coach can change a life. John Wooden. Pretty powerful, huh?
It's very powerful, and it's even more powerful when you understand it from actually having it happen to you.
Pretty wild. So I want to take listeners back. I was telling them in the introduction that I'm a sports book junkie and came across your book and like, thank you, Coach. Well, that was kind of interesting, right? Amazon bestseller. And to me, it's one of the best books I've ever read. And in terms of leadership and management and understanding, it's more than a sports book. It's a book that transcends sports. It's a book that because of sports, teach invaluable life lessons. But as I was saying in the introduction, if you're a CEO or a business leader, or if you're a salesperson, or if you're an investor, there are so many things that you put down on paper that translate into helping you become better at what you do. And you learned about it from a life of football. But God, when I watch your TED Talks, your first TED Talk, you didn't even know what football was till the 11th grade. So for our listeners, take us back. Who's Angus Reid? Tell us about growing up. You come from a big family. I think you have 4 or 5 brothers. You have a sister. And
yeah,
gosh, is it you said poor Mary? She's
come on, she's princess. Come on. So yeah, thanks, Mike. I do come from a big family. Well, yep. I mean, I guess relative in modern times we're massive, and older times we're nothing. I mean, we're 6 kids.
Yep.
5 boys and a girl. I'm the youngest boy, so 4 older brothers and a younger sister. And yeah, little Mary, I wouldn't give her too much hardship. She was the princess that had everything new she wanted. Listen, I never owned anything new until I outgrew my brothers. And that's just the reality of being. Listen, I lived in a closet for 2 years of my life. 4 of us were in one bedroom, and literally my feet were the only thing sticking out of a closet. So my sister had it okay. All right, we're not going to put too much heat on her.
All right, so Mary gets a
yeah. She's all right. She's okay. All right. But thank you for that great intro, Mike. And I'll take you back. It's not entirely true that I didn't know about football. I knew the sport very well. I didn't play it till the 11th grade. My brothers played all sports, and they were my heroes growing up. And we played whatever sport the school offered at every season that they offered.
This was in BC, by the way, British
Columbia?
in
Vancouver. So I grew up in Richmond, which is a suburb of Vancouver, maybe 20 minutes outside. And we ended up going to a all-boys Catholic school, and it was a big sports school in town. And yeah, I mean, my brothers are, put it this way, people talk about parents with children and dealing with youngsters. My mom had 4 under the age of 3. So you can do the math on that if you want. I'm not good enough on math to do those long division fractions, but there's twins there. And then there were 6 years to myself and 6 years to my sister Mary. So I had this clump of 4 heroes in my house that I looked up to. And really my childhood, all it was, Mike, was being dragged around to a soccer tournament, to basketball tournament, to a football game, or to anything else they were doing, because that's all my parents could do was take me along for the ride. And so I really did grow up watching sports and loving it from a kind of a youthful fan perspective. And I had the cool ability to, be my brother's team's ball boy or their mascot or whatever they wanted to do with me. But I got to, sit on their bench and hang out in the locker room at high school games for them. So I really loved sport. And I played everything in elementary school, basketball, soccer. Yeah. I hated soccer. I was a big fat kid, and I hated the running in soccer. It was just, to me, it seemed nonsense. All this running, you never got to do anything because I couldn't get there fast enough. But, and then high school came and everybody thought I'd be a football player. I was a big kid. And my brothers played, but I got really sick my first year in high school. And I don't want to get the story too long, but I had a blown appendix that I didn't tell my parents about for 6 days because I thought if you have a stomach ache and you complain, your brothers laugh at you. So I just kind of dealt with it. And long story short, it almost killed me, as you can imagine, 6 days with a blown appendix. So I spent most of my freshman year in high school in a hospital and really, really holding on for dear life. And that wiped me out. It wiped me out physically, emotionally, and maybe most of all, wiped out all confidence. I came back to school kind of a physical shell and really someone that just didn't believe much in himself. And so I didn't play any sports, nothing. And then even in my 10th grade, kind of wandered the halls, didn't have direction, motivation, didn't have anything. Right. Didn't think much of myself anymore. My brothers were long gone and into life, so they weren't at school anymore, and I felt lost. Right. And then football found me again. Our senior coach, as he always did, you go around the hallways recruiting players, and he invited me to come out and said it in a way that made me feel like they wanted me. And it was a simple message, and it's a real reminder of if you're somebody in any type of authority figure, the way you speak to youth or others can be very powerful. And if you invite them out and give them words that make them feel like they matter, you can really change people. So I felt, wow, maybe I'm wanted, maybe I'm needed, maybe I can do this. And that was heading into the 11th grade, so that's where the seed was replanted, and I came out to the game, and I'd like to say I was an instant star, but that wasn't the story. I was terrible. I had never played the sport before, and people think that, pro athletes must always have been great. Well, that's not always the case. And I was one of those, what do they call them? Kind of a grinder, slow gainers, I guess. And I sat on the bench, didn't know what I was doing in that sport. And I took the long road, and I learned what it meant to commit to something, to ask questions, to work really hard, to stick to learn fundamentals, to master fundamentals, and do all the hard things that it took to get out there. And really, I took the long road. I didn't get on the field till the championship game. I got on kickoff and some nonsense here and there, but I started my championship game, my grade 11 season. I worked my way into the starting lineup for the last game of my grade 11 season, and then grade 12 became a pretty good player, but I was never a blue chip. I was late to the game, and I wasn't a physically imposing guy. I was undersized to be a lineman. So my local school, Simon Fraser, which is the only school in Canada that plays in the U.S. League. When I was there, it was NAIA. Now they're Division II school, but only one in Canada. They offered me a scholarship, which was amazing to me. It was kind of my only option at the time, and I took it. And I don't want to spend too much time on this, but my college career kind of went wonky again. And I tell this in a lot of my keynotes. When you get to university and you want to be now you have aspirations of being a pro football player, just like any job, you look at the requirements and you realize you have to come up with those requirements somehow. And professional linemen are about 300 pounds and usually more than that. And I wasn't, and I was about 235 pounds my freshman year, and maybe a daunting 6'1". Yeah. And so the plan was, let's gain, 80 pounds. So I tell people, what do you eat when you want to gain 80 pounds, Mike? You eat everything. Everything. Yeah. I was just consuming food like maybe more than I was breathing. And I got bigger and stronger, and my appendix from my early days came back to haunt me. You start cramming that much food down a system that's already been damaged years ago. I got really sick again, and I ended up with some ulcers through my bowels, and it was anyways, it's a long story, but I missed 3 years. I missed 3 years of my college football. Oh my gosh. I had to move home. I I shrunk down to 200 pounds again. I mean, it's an insane story, but I was told to never play sports again. Fought my way back, and I made it back for my senior season and played very well. And I was
you
lucky
must
enough
have. I was going to say, you must have.
Yeah.
You were a first-round pick, the fourth overall pick in the 2003 draft.
So how about this? The 2001 draft. So how about this, Mike?
2001, I meant, yeah.
How about this? So I make my way back. I'm an NAI All-American my senior year.
Yep.
I lift strong. I run well. I impress the scouts like you do at a nice job interview, right? You kind of smoke screen them with your resume and make you think you're real good. And I get picked in the first round by the Toronto Argonauts, and I get cut in training camp. I mean, I might be the only professional athlete in the history of all sports to be a number one pick that gets cut in training camp, not traded, okay? Not demoted to a developmental league, cut, flat out cut. You talk about what? Yeah.
Well, but you didn't realize it at the time, which is one of the greatest things. And I always say this as an investor: my greatest sometimes investments are the ones I lose, or especially early on, lost money because they're the best teachers.
Yes.
And that you learn to deal with the failure and do a postmortem and say, like, what could I have done differently? So
big time.
Right. So walk us through that. You're there. Obviously, you're a number one round pick, fourth overall. So it's got to be demoralizing when that's happening to you, right? And
yeah,
go ahead.
Sorry, Mike. Particularly what I'd been through, and it was such a long shot, and I started so late. I missed so much of my college years. I remember when I got drafted, inside it kind of felt like I'd made it. Wow, I never thought I'd get this far, and I beat all the odds. And then to get cut right away, it really did.
Did you know you were going to get cut, Angus? Could you feel it coming?
Yeah, when by the second preseason game when you're not playing, you're kind of like, well, what's going on here, right?
Yeah.
And but I think it's probably similar to your analogy of investments. When you look back, it makes perfect sense why things happened. And to me, I got drafted first number one by the Argos, and because I tested really well. I'm the classic NFL combine mistake. I look good. I was strong because I hadn't played much football. I wasn't physically beat up. I was fresh. But that was the problem. I hadn't played much football. I was very raw. I technically wasn't ready for elite professional football. I just didn't have the years of skill set development. It made sense looking back. I wasn't ready. I really wasn't ready. I mean, I was ready physically, strength and speed, but I wasn't ready in terms of seasoned in how to play this game enough. And so, you talk about lessons learned. Well, the biggest lesson it taught me was, do I really want to do this?
Yeah.
Like, do I have the stomach to fight back, or am I going to let defeat or hardship dictate quitting? Am I just going to say, well, I wasn't good enough. Well, better do something else. And I remember I called home from Toronto and talked to my parents saying, look, I got cut. I don't know what's going to happen. I don't really know if I can make this. And my dad told me, what do you say about it? Because I said, look, they said I'm not good enough. He said, but what do you say? And I told him,
great question.
I can play. I can do it. He goes, well, then what can you do about this? Don't tell me what you can't do. What can you do right now to make yourself move closer to what you want to get done? And so, I got on the phone. I started calling teams, trying to get on a roster, trying to do what I can. And my agent at the time helped. And I said, listen, let's not talk about what we can't do. Let's worry about what we can do right now. What can we do to improve? And
Montreal heard that call.
Yeah, well, they heard it because I kept calling until they picked up the phone. Right? You can't. Back then it wasn't trying to sneak a social media blast. It was old school phone ringing, right?
Yeah,
so, we got myself on Montreal and basically it was a practice roster position, but I always told myself, I don't care where I start. I just got to get in. And so I can climb from there. And we got back in the game and spent that first season. Montreal was good to me. They just said, look, just get better. You're going to be on the developmental team here. Just improve. So, every moment it was my dad's advice. What can you do? I was first guy out on the field, last guy to leave, doing the extra reps, studying at home, soaking up everything I could from the veterans. No ego, just a willingness to want to get better. And I was there till week 15 and they GM called me up. I go, great, I'm getting cut again. And he said, listen, Angus, we're trading you. And I'll never forget this. I said, I hope you're trading me to BC, which is home, because I just don't want to go anywhere else anymore. That was what it was.
You get a free plane ride.
100%. I said, at worst case scenario, I get a free flight home. And they trade me, and he traded me to BC, and I spent the last couple of weeks on the practice roster there. And then my second year with the Lions, kind of made the roster, was a was a backup, kind of grinding my way through, but not really doing well. Like just kind of hanging on. And really my second year in BC was really making myself question myself. Do I have what it takes to make this? And I just sort of got through. And that's where the book sort of picks up, where entering my third year pro in 2003, we had a full coaching staff change. And then I really got worried because now we have a new coach, doesn't know who I am. And my positional coach came with that staff, and Coach Dan Dorazio became my new offensive line coach. And from that moment on was when my career, but more importantly, my entire life changed when he entered the picture.
Tell us about the day your cell phone rang in January of 2003.
Yep. Yeah. Well, with the backdrop of what I've just told you, my phone rang and I knew it was the BC Lions calling, and my initial thought was, I'm getting released. New staff. Here's the call. I haven't put anything on a resume in my first 2 years to prove why I should be their guy. They're going to move on with their own people, and so I didn't have high expectations of this call. And on the other line, I hear this, Angus, it's Coach Dan Dorazio. I'll never forget it. He's very slow and deliberate with his voice. This is Coach Dan Dorazio, new offensive line coach. I'm going, okay, new. If he's telling me he's my new offensive line coach, that means I haven't been cut yet.
Yeah, that's right.
Right? Okay. And so I felt okay. And he wanted to invite me out to a lunch on my convenience, which was kind of weird. I'd never had coaches at the professional level ask me, when did I want to meet? Where do I want to meet? And it was a totally different conversation than I'd ever heard.
So that's something interesting. You say that in the book, and you say he put the power in your hands.
Yeah.
And that was your first time, right? I've never at any level of sports experienced that, but at the professional level, which I couldn't even sniff, that was completely different. It's not a rule by authoritarian nature then. And so how did that break the barriers down for you?
Well, I think particularly too, Mike, in someone in my situation, I mean, maybe if you're a Tom Brady, you have some power in the conversation, but here I am, a nobody that has no confidence, that's never had any validation that I belong here. And here's a new coach who I do not know, who's asking me, when would it be okay to meet? When would I like to meet? Where would I like to have lunch? He'd like to take me for lunch. It put me in a position where I felt like I belonged, and he was interested in me and wanting to get to know me and have the courtesy to ask if we could meet up. Ask how, where could he take me for lunch? And I don't know if that's the way you should do it or not, but I can tell you, with me, it changed my frame of mind from being a nervous, insecure young athlete that had no idea what these people think of me to excited to meet my new coach in a framework that this might be someone I might want to spend some time with. And that, to me, if you start relationships that way, where there's a coach or a leader and a player underneath, that now has opened the door for trust off the bat. It's opened the door for good conversation off the bat. It's opened the door for me coming in wanting to engage in this person and find out who they are, instead of, being a little cautious of my new coach and should I give him any information, or I don't know what he's thinking of me. It puts you in a different mindset and a frame of mind to begin the long work that would come ahead.
So now you say, yeah, I'd like to go. As a matter of fact, I want to go to Boston Pizza because that's my favorite place. So you guys meet, and he shows up, and he's wearing well pressed slacks and a crisp starched golf shirt, and pours more pepper on his soup and salad than you've ever seen. But there was something during that conversation that struck me, which you pointed out. He asked a lot of what and not why questions. And talk about that, because I think it translates, because when I'm asking management team questions, the why questions I've always thought do put them on their heels, whereas the what questions don't. And if it's same thing, if you're a sales manager and you have people working for you, when you're giving people the ability to talk and not make them feel threatened or defensive, it gets so much more out of it. So talk about how Dan walked you through that.
Well, it's funny too, Mike, because I didn't realize a lot of this stuff till later
Yeah,
in my
of course.
career.
Yeah,
You know,
yeah.
you don't know when it's happening. All you
Yep,
know is
totally.
you feel good about it, right?
Yep.
And you have to look back, go, and then you have to ask yourself why.
Yeah.
Why was that a good conversation? Why do I like talking to this person? Why do I feel comfortable and engaged? And most importantly, why do I trust this person?
Yep.
Because that's what it comes down to, right? And so I was so used to meeting coaches, and they would lay out how they coach, their system, their expectations. This is what we do here, and basically telling you how they operate so you can adjust. That's kind of the normal way. Look, this is the offense we run. This is our blocking system. And Dan really, most of the talk had nothing to do with football. He was interested in who I was, things I liked to do, things I was proud of, family history, who were my heroes. And again, they were not a lot of why. It was a lot of what do you like most? What are some things that you're very proud of? Very open-ended questions. And they were just letting me engage the conversation as I felt fit. They were letting me open up and just start talking. And what Dan knew at the beginning was his number one job was to get to know who I was as a person first. And the only way to do that is to get someone comfortable enough to open up and start talking about things that matter to them, because Dan could then take that and use that as the framework for how he would coach me moving forward. And I don't want to skip too far ahead, but there's a phrase he said to us at the beginning of every training camp that took me a long time to figure out. And it was this: I will treat each of you fairly, but I will not treat you all the same, because you're not all the same. And to do that would be unfair. And that is a very powerful line that I think every leader needs to take into account. That, again, Dan would teach us, we will grade you and evaluate you objectively, but I will coach you subjectively, because each of you are different people. And
that's a lot of work for him to do that.
That is massive amount of work. And think of this, Mike. People say, managers in business say, well, I have too much staff and I could never get that. I could never reach everybody. Listen, the football world, some of the average career spans are 3 days.
Yeah.
And the turnover is insane. I mean, the reason this book worked is because I played 13 years and 11 of them with Dan. Nobody has an 11-year relationship with one coach except maybe Tom Brady. I mean, it's very rare.
Right.
So the depth he knew me was more than anybody. But no matter who it was, if they lasted 4 days, or 4 years or 14 years, he did what he could at the beginning to take the time to get to know the person as well as he could, so he could frame his coaching to them and personalize it as best as possible under whatever situation he had. It mattered that much to him because he knew his job was to maximize our ability to play this sport. And the only way we could he could help maximize us, was to know how to get through to us. And the only way to know how to get through to someone is to actually know who they are, what they care about, what matters to them, how they respond to things, so he could tailor his coaching. And you're right, that takes a ton of time. But that's the difference between a coach that can coach technique and systems and a coach that can coach people. And that's what it comes down to.
Well, and think about how that translates into business. And I was saying before you got on the podcast, one of the things that I always find in talking to all these management teams, so much of what they say, they're programmed to say, but meeting with them and talking with them to really try and understand how the sausage is made is important. And after doing thousands of them, you get to kind of really get a sense for kind of who's kind of full of crap and who's not full of crap. But it really is, one of the things you mentioned when we were talking just now, you said, well, guys will say in management positions, I got so many guys, I can't get to know them. Well, that's fine. If you're the CEO or the head of sales and you have 2,000 direct reports, but there's a chain of command, and down below that guy may have 30 direct reports. It's not impossible for that guy to get to know 30 different people and understand what motivates people. And I find that a one-size-fits-all approach doesn't always work. And it sounds like what Dan was doing was the antithesis of a one-size-fits-all approach, because you first have, and also by giving you some power, if you will, it sounds like it enabled you to know that when he was going to what you were soon to find out with your box jumps and what would lie ahead is it wasn't peaches and cream. Just because he was nice at that meeting didn't mean that he was going to make this a walk in the park for you. But by breaking down that barrier and making you feel comfortable with him, that gave him almost the key and the ability to really just be brutally honest with you, because you felt as though he was separating Angus Reid, the person, from Angus Reid, the football player. Is that a fair characterization?
Yeah, it is. And I think, you touched on a few things that I really believe made the difference between Dan and probably a lot of other coaches or other mentors out there. Again, he took the time that a lot of people don't think they have, but you realize it's necessary if you want to get the most out of anybody, to get to know me, but most importantly, to allow me to know that he actually cared about me, as you said, about me as a human being. He cared about who I was, and that showed. And so when we got to the next stage and all the rest of the stages where he had to push me and criticize my performance at a level that needed to be better, I always knew, one, he cared about me as a person, and two, he was doing these things because he cared about me as a person. And we'll get it, maybe we'll touch on it later. The language he used when he wanted to criticize and push was always about the technique or the action being taken, never about me as a human being. That is massive. And I don't think a lot of leaders consciously think of the words they use enough when they're critiquing or looking to improve. You always attack the problem, never the person. And so when he would push and he would, sometimes he would scream and yell and demand, it was always because a technique or footwork, or there was an error in what was happening, not directed at me as a human being, because he cared about me and there was nothing wrong about me. There was just maybe some things wrong with how I was performing, the given play or the given technique. And to me, it may sound small and it may sound like semantics to some people in words, but I'm firsthand knowledge of if you cement that caring, that belief that the coach, the leader cares about you as a person, you can engage in all the criticism possible to improve you, because they're doing it because they actually care about you, and they're not critiquing you as a person. They're critiquing the performance and the actions that need improvement, and that's good.
Yep. So I find it interesting. You talk. There was a part in the book where you talked about listening to Dan on a radio program, and he was talking about a new draft pick. He's 6'5", measured 305, new offensive lineman, right? And Dan says he's got good girth, he's got a great body, right? He's everything you want in an offensive lineman. And here you are listening to this, going, "Oh, great! Here comes the guy to take my job," right? And But the NFL, just like business, it's all about measurables. And I think about it. A lot of the questions I get when I'm looking at a management team, right? I'll talk to say somebody said, "You should take a look at XYZ company. Guy's got a great CV." Okay, great CV, and he's got great pedigree, so he came from somewhere. Well, I learned in the investment business, Angus, when I first started, I came from a tiny little local commuter college. I first started out at the University of Arizona. I didn't finish there. I went to a local school where I grew up, which isn't even open anymore. So I didn't have, I fought and clawed my way in, and I got into the business, but I was around really pedigreed guys from, top flight business schools. And at first that's intimidating. But then you kind of realize as you start to do it and you're grinding it out every day, that those measurables don't necessarily mean anything. And, it took me, a couple of years to say, I couldn't be less impressed with where he went to school. It doesn't matter. It's kind of like the guy who has a big wingspan. He's 6'5". He's got big hands, big feet. Because that's important. I see so many. So this podcast is for a lot of individual investors listening, and they're business owners, they're executives, or whatever they are. But I see it's important to understand when I see individual on Twitter, especially, somebody will say they always reference what the CEO said as though it's gospel, as though they laid out the framework for what's going to happen, and it's going to happen. And those guys have great measurables. But it doesn't mean it's going to work. What did you see in your career? All those measurables. It's just like in the draft. You never know what you're going to get. So how do you separate fact from fiction? How did you, what did you see to be able to do that?
I think that was all very well said, Mike. And I guess sounds like you and I have a similar storyline where we were underdog long shots that we were never exactly what people wanted when they're drawing up the perfect scenario for what's required. And you're right. Every line of business has measurables to do their best to sort of, weed out, the cream and the rest. And they have to, because you have to start somewhere, because there's thousands of people that want a finite number of jobs. So I get it. You need a vetting process and you need to do something, even how imperfect it really is. And in football, it's very tangible because they go off body measurements and actual human actions that are easily to time and count. But really, my position, there was 4 measurables that mattered because they couldn't be changed, and it was height, wingspan, hand size, and foot size. And they could tell you how that correlates into the ability to block and absorb force and cover more space. And they're correct. As you said very well, that doesn't equate always to a better player and to someone that can contribute to a team winning. And it might, but I think we put too much stock in, this plus this will always equal great. And I don't want to jump ahead, but I speak so much to kids all the time in schools because I outline what the measurables are and I show myself against them. And I'm embarrassingly pathetic compared to them. Yet I'm the one that played 13 years, right? That puts me in that top 1% of the top 1%. And so I feel confident when I speak to kids because I tell them all the time, it's one thing for me to tell you that you could do it too. And here I am, 6'9" with a 7'3" wingspan and size 19 foot. And every kid's looking at me like, no, I can't. I don't have that. Yeah. Right. And neither do I. So, okay. So when you asked me the question, what did I find really matters? Well, Dan explained it to me early in my career and then at the end of my career. And I believe that this is true. And I believe it's true in the business world. I know it's true in relationships, in family, in community. The 2 most dominant characteristics of greatness, shall we say, whether it be a team, but most importantly, an individual in any walk of business. Dan explained this very well to me, very clearly, was durability and dependability. Yeah. And to me, these were 2 things that had nothing to do with innate talent or physical gifts that you happen to be given. These were choices. And in football, people think durability probably correlates to, well, the body can take a lot of pounding without breaking. He's lucky. Yeah, maybe that's true. But really the way it was explained to me and the way I understood durability was the importance of what you've committed to is more important than all the other distractions that happen to you every day that will take your attention elsewhere, or all the reasons why you shouldn't, wouldn't, or can't continue down your road, but you do it anyways because you're durable. Because you know what? You've committed to something. You don't feel like it today, you do it anyways. You're tired, you do it anyways. You'd rather do other things that seem more enjoyable in the moment, you do it anyways. To me, that's durability. You keep showing up no matter what. And that to me is a rare trait, but I think you would agree. Take your business cases. When you look at companies, if they're not durable, I couldn't give a damn how talented they are, because I don't know if they're going to show up tomorrow.
You weren't listening to the intro, but what I was talking about in the beginning of the podcast was one of the things that sports taught me, and I didn't know how to articulate it, but it was always innate in me, was that it's that cold November and practices after 2.5 hours, you've got to run 10, 100-yard sprints, and then you got to go run 2 miles, but you want to throw up and you're thinking, I can't do this, but you can.
Yes, of course you can.
Of course you can. And it's the same thing with hockey. You want to throw up doing sprints at the end of practice. But how I equated it to my work life was a company reports its earnings and simultaneously releases its annual report. And now it's 1:00 in the morning, and you've got to go through those footnotes in that annual report, because that's where the good stuff is. Not the BS they put out in the press release, but where you're going to find really how the sausage is made is down in the stuff in the small print. And sometimes the last thing you want to do at 1:00 in the morning is say, holy shit, I got to go through another 30 pages of this. But you don't even think about it. You just process it and go through it and do it. And that's because that's where it's made. But it becomes a repeatable process. And you learn about repeatability from doing it all the time. and having that, as you call it, the iron will to do that, and then B, repeating that process over and over, which then makes you become durable. So, right. I mean, that's you first learned that with Dan on your first day of meeting him, right? I mean, talk about that, and because that opened you up. You didn't necessarily have that, right, when you first started.
Well,
you did to get to that level. You did. Yes.
You just don't realize how
much
more you need to get to. And here's the thing, and Mike, that was very well said about how it translates into business. And here's the thing, I think durability. I think it's way higher rated than talent, because if someone will show up every single day, you can game plan and manage the rest, knowing that they're going to be there. If they're not, then who cares? Their resume is useless, right? Yep. And here's the thing, I think coaches and leaders need to realize is, I think a lot of people think durability is you're lucky if you have an employee that's durable. No. You need to coach it. You need to coach durability, and you can coach durability. I learned about durability, and you have to basically show them what that means, push them to get there. And as you said, keep them there by repeating the process, so that becomes normalized. That getting up every day and doing what you've committed to do is what you do. It's not a chore anymore. It's what you've been conditioned to be able to do. It needs to be coached. And my first workout with Dan, he had this, I walked into the room and there was this 36-inch high box. And maybe that sounds high to some, maybe it doesn't. I don't know. I was 310 pounds and, I figured we're going to jump on this thing. Okay. I've done box jumps before. Well, no. We're going to stand to the side of it. So it's on my right-hand side. And he wanted me to do a 180 all the way around to get on the top. Okay. I can do that. And then jump back down to 180, come right back up. Okay. I can probably do that. And then we're going to do it 40 times. And we broke it into sets. I'm like, I don't think I can do that. But whatever, right? And so we start doing these reps after reps, and I'm gassed by a third way through. And there's no way I'm going to do anymore. Just like you said on the sprints, there's just no way you can do it. Yep. And what I learned, and I think we know this, the mind will always quit before the body. You're always going to tell yourself you can't do it before you actually can't do it. Yep. And that's where building durability comes in. And that's where a coach that will show you that you can do more. But it comes back to the beginning, Mike. If he hasn't built trust and he hasn't built the point that I know he cares about me, he's just some prick yelling at me then. Why would I do it for him? He doesn't give a damn about me. He's just going to use and abuse me. But once you've built that connection with someone and you know how to push them, and they know that pushing is coming from a point of caring, you'll do more. And then you'll learn that you can do more. And I finished those whole box jumps. We got up the next day and I saw him. We did them again. And I don't think that's probably healthy. What we did from a biomechanic, human kinetics, kinesiology standpoint, it doesn't matter. Durability at the highest level isn't always about making sure you feel great and you're always fresh. It's about doing what you've got to do because life demands that of you. And you need to be trained to that level and have an understanding that that's where you live if you want to be exceptional at things. It's about going past the point where most people won't, because it's hard. It's too difficult. And because they've never been there, they don't think they can get there. And they need a coach that can show them that not only can you get there, but you can live at that point for a very long period of time. And that's where you win. As you said, it's those hours working after everyone else is exhausted of doing anything where you find the good stuff. That's where you do the good things. That's where you do the things that other people, I would suggest, just won't do. Not that they can't, but they won't. And that's a big separator. And that, Mike, is available to anybody. That is not wingspan. That is not foot size. That is not talent.
And it's free. It doesn't cost anything to do. I mean, you say something in the book. You say you don't rise to the level of your expectations. You fall to the level of your training. Right. And so the listeners on this podcast, like I said, I don't do it for institutional investors. I do it for folks. Obviously, if you're taking the time to find the Mike Alkin Show, I'm a nobody. And they went out, found
come
this
on,
thing.
Mike.
No, but I mean, come on, there's thousands, right? I mean, I'm just a regular professional investor that kind of tries to share my insights with people. But they come on and they listen, so they obviously have an interest in learning. And one of the things I get asked a lot, whether it's where I live at my son's ball game or if I'm playing hockey, what do you like? What stocks? You have a good stock tip? Like, yeah, okay. That's the stupidest question I ever get. But people, what I realized over time as an investor. So for most of my career, all my career, I'm in the hedge fund industry. And what happened as the hedge fund industry grew, you would go to peer dinners where a bunch of guys would get together and have a dinner, maybe 10 or 12 or 15 guys. And you'd sit around and you'd go around the table, say, what's interesting to you? What are you working on? What do you like? And somebody would say, oh, I like XYZ company, and here's the thesis. And they lay out their thesis. And then you hear enough of those, something might sound interesting, and then you go back to your office. And what tends to happen is, an analyst at a hedge fund is covering, let's say, 15 or 20 stocks, and he's trying to outperform the index that they're benchmarked against. And he hears a good idea, and it's a smart guy, and it was another pedigreed guy, and they're at this dinner, and he goes back and he does a little bit of work, and he assumes that guy who pitched it did a lot of work. And so now he presents that idea, and that idea gets in the portfolio. And then the way he stays current on it is by calling that guy that he got the idea from. Or he may do a little bit of work on his own. But now, because that idea is currency for him, Angus, it's currency when he's talking to another mate from another firm. The guy will call up and say, what do you like? And he'll say, I just did some work on this idea, and I just put this in the portfolio. So now that guy says, hey, here's a pretty good idea. I kind of like that. And he does a little bit of work and he puts it in the portfolio. Now you see how the game of telephone starts. And you know how the game of telephone ends is you say something at the beginning, and then 20 people later, it's a completely different story. Well, that's the idea dinner. That's the evolution of how a lot of this stuff's work. So somewhere down the line, you have a portfolio. Some guys have a whole portfolio of names that they know a little bit about, but not a lot about. And what I always find is if you don't have a lot of names that you're looking at, a lot of names that you're focused on, but you just can focus and keep working harder on those few names, you're going to know it better than everyone. And you keep training yourself to keep doing that. Doesn't mean you're always going to get it right. Shit happens in investing. You could miss something, you get something wrong, but your chances of diving deeper, having a disciplined process to understand. Now, part of it you just have to know, right? You have to understand a little bit of finance. You have to understand the income statement, balance sheet, cash flow statement, the relationships within those. But it doesn't matter if you know, because every one of those guys at that idea dinner, they're smart. They're crazy smart. They're ridiculously smart. And I always say this when I talk to professionals versus an amateur investor. The professional investor is crazy, off the chart smart, well-versed in multiple industries, well-versed in global geopolitics, but it doesn't mean he's a better stock picker or she's a better stock picker. Because if you as an amateur and you as a do-it-yourselfer learn a process and repeat that process and work hard, you can do well. And so I find so much of what you're saying about the you can do more and the process by which you go about it is so important. And I just thought it was fantastic when I was reading that, because there's so much of what you're saying is that. And another thing that you talked about in the book, which I thought was interesting, was always being ready to go. And you talked about, Dan used to say, do you ever see a cheetah warm up?
Right.
And talk about that, because I think that's an interesting, and I think there are correlations with business and investing.
Yeah, I think there is. I think it's everything to do with life. Look, we live in a society now, Mike, where we've been conditioned and sold that maybe because there's a whole business behind this, but you need to do all these things to prepare yourself to get ready. And I'm talking initially from the sports perspective, right? There's this elongated 15-minute warm-up you need to do, a dynamic warm-up, and then make sure your nutrition is perfect and all these things. And it really handcuffs you from dealing with reality, because I don't know how many times in life, whether it be a business, something happens, you go, wait a minute though, I gotta get ready here. I need about 20 minutes to kind of warm things up. You go, no, you got to deal with this now. And so there's two things. There's always being prepared. So that's your constant work on your art or your craft, shall we say. So you're always working on it. So you're never caught off guard. You're constantly honing your craft. So for me, physically, it was, keeping mobile, keeping strong in the evenings, in the mornings, anytime I had a chance, like a cheetah, they kind of stretch here and there. And you're always kind of, you're working away at what you're committed to and focused, always, whenever you can. So when an issue happens, whether it be, you got to come off the bench in the middle of a game, or the bus broke down and now you don't have time for the warm up, but you got to play. And if you let yourself get so handcuffed to this need for this elaborate process before you can do anything, you're done. You're done. You need to be able to respond to life right now and go from 0 to 100 in a heartbeat. And that is a mentality, that's a psychology that has to be coached, reinforced. And we got to get away from, well, you can't do anything until you do all these things first. No, you got to be always doing things. So when life throws the problem, which is an opportunity at you, you can jump before anyone else, deal with it, solve it, win it, and move on. And that again comes down to a durable person that can attack when they got to attack, because their mind is ready to go, and they don't need everything to be just right and have ticked all these boxes before. You could make the case, when you're looking at businesses, you're looking at companies, and when a situation arises, you're ready to jump because you're always ready. You're always ready. You've been doing your work every day to your craft. So you can make the move where other person goes, whoa, I need some time now to think this through. It's over. And the amateur goes, well, I'll just jump in and do things yet. Well, if you haven't trained yourself appropriately, you make terrible mistakes because you're making a decision based on nothing. But the pro is always working their craft, so they're always ready to go, if that makes sense.
It so makes sense, because I see a lot of times, and people make the mistake, when it hits the news, when something, back in the early part of the 2000s, I worked for a fund called Zweig Demena, and it's still around. It was just a very big hedge fund, incredibly successful. And the Zweig was a guy named Marty Zweig, and God rest his soul, he passed a few years ago. But Marty was a high-profile economist, and he was on Louis Rukeyser's Wall Street Week, which is a very popular show in the 80s and 90s and 2000s. And he started a hedge fund with Joe Demena with just a few $1 million, and they turned it into, when I was there, it was a $10 billion fund years ago, right? So really successful. And Marty used to say, it was like a loose rule, but if something we really like shows up on the cover of 2 national news magazines, it's time to get out, because it's already there. And what you tend to find, though, is people react to what's presented to them in the moment, and versus having done the homework beforehand. When if 2 national magazine covers said it's a bear market, well, that's already reflected in the price of the stocks. Right. So it's time to start thinking to go the other way. And I think it's really interesting, because you talk about in the book, dysfunction is always a hindrance. And you talk about how you have to reverse engineer everything, and that's kind of how Dan taught you. You learn in reverse. And I kind of think about that from investing, and I'd love to get your view on this, because the outcome is I'd like the stock to go up or down depending on whether or not I'm long and short. But man, I got to go backwards. I got to go and say, okay, well, what are the expectations? Are Wall Street expectations for revenues to go up 10%? Well, how are they going to get there? What's the mix of price versus volume? So I got to reverse engineer the numbers from what the expectations are. It sounds in your profession, that's what you had to do as well.
I would totally agree. The way we were taught, whether it be any type of block we had to learn, which, similar to your industry, there's multiple things that you have to be able to do to be successful in a football. There's multiple different blocks that are required to run the whole offense. And the way we taught, or Dan taught us, was always at the end. So what does this look like at the end? And let's learn that and feel it, so we can know how to get to that place. Because if you start at the beginning and your body and your mind doesn't know where it's going, it's very hard to understand why we're here and why we're doing the next step. And you're trying to create a road where we want to know where the destination is, and we can drag the road backwards. So we're always, now we have a smooth way to get there. And so we'd finish a block in the finished position. And here's something, when you're coaching, I think is very important. I think this transfers to anything. It's one thing to coach someone how to do it, and to see it. A lot of people use video and film, and you review what you did and you see yourself up there, and that's important. But I think you need to understand what it feels like to do it. So Dan would coach us in the finished position, and we would hold it until we had that ingrained of what it felt like to be right there. So whether that be closing your deal, what does that feel like when you're doing it? So when you get there, how to feel right. And we'd walk it backwards of mechanically how to get to that position. And each part of the step, he would ingrain it so we knew intuitively it felt right, not just him telling us it's right or we saw it on film that it's right. I knew what felt right and what felt wrong in the moment. Because what happens is once you've properly walked it backwards and now you start doing it in real speed, you know if it feels right in the moment, and you're able to self-correct, which I think a lot of people never get to that point. They always need a coach forever. Did I do it right? Did I do it right? Looking in the business world, they come running to you, Mike, did I do it right?
Yep.
You'll know. Your coach has taught you what right feels like, what it looks like, and how and what it actually is. So you're doing it now going, right away, I'm doing it right because I've been put here by my coach a million times, and I know this feels right. And it feels off. You're able to maybe ask for some guidance, but maybe even self-correct and go, well, it feels good now. Now I know. And there's a rhythm to knowing what perfection, or not perfection, but what proper feels like. And you do it again and again. When you're out of sync. When it feels wrong. You're able to get yourself back in. And it was very, very powerful because it takes a long time to learn to do something right.
Yep.
I mean, that's just the truth. You think you can shortcut that or hack it, forget it. It takes a long time to know how to do something right. But once you know how to do it right, this is why it's so important to coach it correctly from the get-go. You can roll through it, a few reps here and there every day. You don't need a lot of reps, because once it's right, you're just kind of reinforcing the wiring of it. Even once you know what you're doing, Mike, you just make sure you do a bit of it all the time.
Yep.
So you're always ready. You're always ready. But it takes a long time at the beginning, and a coach, a teacher needs to take you through each part of that step so you really know what you're doing and how it feels to do it correctly. And then for the rest of your time when it's a little off. It. When things are a little off. And maybe you need guidance, and that's what coach is there. But usually you can kind of self-correct. Yeah, that feels good again. I got it. And that to me is how you do things right. There's no way of getting around that. You need to learn at the front end bit by bit. And he reverse engineered it, so we always knew we were trying to get to and how to get there. And then once we had it down, a little bit of reps every day to make sure the wiring was always reinforced and strong. And so you ingrained what correct is, and you knew how it felt, and you knew how to do it, and you were durable at doing it, and you were dependable at doing it because you always did it. And that meant you were always ready to go when the real game time hit. You didn't need this elongated process because you were always doing it, and you did it right. And so when the lights came on, you just did what you know how to do.
Makes great sense. One of the things, you have a whole chapter dedicated to excuses, and again, translating into investing. I listen when I'm meeting with management teams, or if I'm listening to a transcript, or if I'm reading a transcript, or listening to a conference call or a presentation. If they've hit a rough patch, I want to hear what they learned from it. And I can't tell you how many times I hear excuse after excuse after excuse, and versus, well, let me tell you what we missed. Here's what we could have done better. And when I hear a lot of excuses, it tells me that they're playing the victim versus being proactive and trying to figure out how to avoid. I see it in a lot of deeply cyclical industries. Let's use uranium. Now, it's been in a brutal bear market, had been in a brutal bear market for a long time. And if you're a uranium producer, there's nothing you can do to overcome a 90% decline in a commodity. But that doesn't mean you couldn't have done other things proactively to not have to dilute shareholders so much throughout the downturn. There were steps you could have taken ahead of time or during it with a little bit of preparation and foresight. And when I speak to some of the management teams, I could see that they didn't have that full grasp of the macro. Not all, but some of them. They didn't have that full grasp of what was going on in the market, and may still not. Now, and they're full of excuses, some of them, not all. How talk about your experience with excuses and how that played out as in your career.
Well, I learned early on from Dan a simple phrase that I think translates everywhere in life. There are never any excuses. There's reasons. And the second we deal with that type of mindset, you can look to improve. As you said, excuses is kind of a victim card, but even worse than that, it's become a statement that doesn't that states that you're not open to one even looking to correct the problem or get better. You're going to hold on to the excuse. You said, this is why it can't work. This is why I wasn't able to do it, where reasons will open the door to solving that problem. The reason shows, listen, the analogy in the book was, it would happen right off the bat where I was going to block somebody and I tripped over my own feet and I fell. And Dan said, you fell. I said, well, I tripped over my own feet. That, I looked it off like that happened.
Right.
So who cares? Like, that's just what happened in life. And that was unacceptable, because we had to look at, well, why did we fall? Well, my footwork was bad. Well, let's work on the footwork, improve it is, and then you don't fall next time. But if it's just like, well, yeah, but you fall in life, right? Well, that wasn't good enough, because that was an excuse, and it didn't look at the root of the problem. As you said, in the business world, maybe they didn't understand the macros. But like, let's look at why. And this is coming back to, he didn't say why off the bat, but you get to a point where you need to address the root of the cause, and that's the reason. And let's work on that so we can improve the situation, and ideally moving forward proactively take care of that so this doesn't happen anymore. But if you just lean on excuses, you're not interested in solving any problems. You're not interested in getting any better. You're interested in making sure they know why you can't do something, or why you weren't able to do it, and that's good enough. And that's not good enough. It's not good enough if you're at a high level. It's not good enough if you care about improvement. And it's a mindset where you're looking to solve the problem, not looking at giving a reason why you couldn't do something. And that was something that lasted with me all through my career. I mean, even in my book, it got to the point where I had forgotten, or I'd mispacked a pair of shoes, and I only had two left shoes. I think
two left shoes.
And we're running out of time, because I'm not someone that took a lot of time pregame, because I'm a cheetah now, and I'm not physically a cheetah, but mindset wise, I didn't need 3 hours to get ready for a game, and realized I didn't have a right shoe. And there's the proactive excuse, right? I think a lot of people look at things like, well, I don't have this, so it's not going to be a good game today, or I'm not going to be a good show. And they've put their mind at a place where they've already given themselves an out because of a situation that they found themselves in before they've even done anything. They've told themselves why, well, it'll be all right. I don't have this, so I already got a reason out. And that's not good enough. You need to problem solve, and you need to look at how you can fix solutions, and not go to an excuse, which becomes a very convenient way to not bother getting better. It becomes a very convenient way to not address any real issues. It gives you a sidetrack conversation that allows you to avoid dealing with the reality of whatever's not good enough in the moment. And that is something that our parents need to teach our children again. Our coaches need to keep players accountable, and the coaches need to be accountable to themselves, that there are no excuses. There are reasons, and reasons you deal with and you improve so we can move forward.
So one of the things that you play in front of 50, 60,000 people, and you're a center. So you're calling out the defense, and you're calling out the blocking assignments. And so you're the quarterback of the offensive line. And to anyone, who's played in front of that amount of noise, I mentioned I'm buddies with Chad Cascadden, who was a jet linebacker for a lot of years back in the early 2000s. And he was telling me in 98, 99, when the Jets played in Denver at the AFC Championship game, he said, you couldn't even hear yourself think. It was so loud. It was like it was just a jet engine in your ears the whole time. When you're in that environment, you've got to learn to just block out the noise and take things as they come and slow the game down. The game moves at 100 miles an hour, but you got to get it down to 5 miles an hour. And you talk about that. And there's a parallel here, because when the markets are moving and news comes out and it's breaking, you can really react and panic, and do what I try and do, and I think I'm pretty decent at doing it. Just step back and say, okay, what's the situation we have here? Don't look at the screen, don't look at the stock, don't let the market tell you if you're right or wrong. What's going on? I had a young analyst working for me years ago, and we were short a company, a for-profit education company. And the earnings report came out, and I don't look at the after hours quotes, because that's knee-jerk reaction. That's headline, people reading headlines. And so the report came out. I printed it out. My office door was closed, and I started reading it. And I thought, this company's full of shit, and here's where they're lying. Because I had a model already done. I had what was expected for this particular quarter and what I was anticipating that they could do to make those numbers look better. Well, 20 minutes later, the analyst comes in, he opens my door. He's like, shit, we were wrong. The stock's ripping. And now the conference call hadn't started. I said, the stock's going to end the night down, I'm telling you. And he said, no, but look at this and that. I said, listen to me. Never look at it. And I told him this before, but he let enthusiasm get in the way. Sure enough, the numbers on the conference call, it just took a couple of questions to pull the veil out, to pull the veil off, and the stock imploded the next day. It was down like 35%. But you have to learn how to slow the game down. Talk about, and preparation plays a role in that. Talk about your ability to do that and how that translates to business.
Well, I think you just said how it translates to business. And I think you really said what it comes down to is there's a preparation process that has to take place. I mean, I think as Mike Tyson had a very great quote. He's had a lot of terrible quotes. Okay.
Yeah, but
he's got a great quote. Yeah. He's got a great quote. You know, everybody's got a plan until they get punched in the face.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then emotions take over, and then nobody makes good decisions emotionally.
Yeah.
Nobody.
But how did you do that?
And so that's training. It's coaching. It's all coaching, and it's coaching in terms of, one, getting you in those environments often in practice situations. So you can't expect somebody to perform in an environment they've never been in before. That's just unfair from a coaching perspective to go, we'll practice you in this nice little safe environment, then we'll throw you out there and just think that it translates. No, practice has to be at an intense level that can translate somewhat. You have to prepare people accordingly in that environment, but you have to give them tools how to handle it. And so, as you said, there's a process that you leaned on when news would hit, you know. So in the football world, that's when the game is live and the defense is moving around like crazy. You need to lean on a process and how to make decisions. You have to lean on that, or else you're going to revert to emotions, which is going to make them dictate your decisions, which is horrible, where they're able to control how you respond because they're owning your emotions. The situation should dictate how you respond without you personally being invested in it. Your process is invested in it. So, you know, we had, as a center, I'd walk out and immediately it wasn't like, holy cow, there's a bunch of people moving around.
Right.
It's right. Okay. Is there 3 down or 4 down? Is there 3 defensive linemen or 4 defensive linemen? Nothing else matters. Nothing else matters. Everything else is noise, right? There's 3. Yep. Good. You've cut out half the possibilities for the call. Okay. You know, is this personnel and or is this? He gave me basically a 1, 2, 3, 4 checklist. You go and you don't skip steps. You start at the first one, you go to the second one, no matter what is going on, no matter if there's 0 people in the stadium or 50,000, if they're all lined up nice and tight, telling you where they are, or if they're running around like crazy, the process is the process. Is this person out there? No, tick, good. You remove those options. Is this person out there? Tick, you move those options. And you weed yourself down to a extremely highly probable answer to the problem at hand. You're not always perfect, just like your industry. We're not always perfect, but you follow the system that works. You're going to be right a lot more times than you're wrong. And that's how you win. And that's how you avoid the pitfalls of 99% of the world reacting emotionally and hoping and guessing, and then getting really excited and proud if they got it right and getting really mad if they got it wrong. But either one was based off nothing. And so it's unrepeatable, and you don't learn anything and you don't get better. And that's where most people spin their tires and they hope their talent's good enough to get them away from their own emotional disasters. And it's frustrating because as a coach, you can't work with that, but it's your own fault as a coach because you haven't implemented a system to short circuit their own biggest problem, which is emotions.
What do you say? People ask me, what do you think one of the top keys to investing are? And I always say a repeatable process. Where does that rank for you? Yeah,
100%. I mean, particularly in the sport of football. You know, football is such a mechanical, particularly offensive line, shall we say. It's such a detailed, technical position. It's your ability to do it right, or do it the way it's supposed to be done again and again and again and again, whether it's raining, whether it's shining, whether the person is 400 pounds or 300 pounds or 200 pounds. You focus on your system and do it again and again. And as long as, you know, if there's problems, you have to keep, you look back at the system, and you don't sit here and adapt every single time to different people. Obviously, your strategies will manipulate a little bit depending on strengths and weaknesses, but you worry about doing what you do properly, and it's something that can be done again and again and again. You get great at it. And if you get great at something, I don't care what they're doing. I'm going to keep doing what I'm doing because I know it works. And we keep assessing how I do things, not so much of what everyone else is doing. You worry about your own process. And is this something that works? And is it repeatable? then you can build everything else around it. And that comes back to the very beginning of this conversation, Mike, where that has nothing to do with innate talent. That has nothing to do with, jumping power and speed and strength and arm strength. It's that boring, methodical, repeatable, learned behavior that enables you to weather storms, that enables you to, keep going when everyone else is always reacting and panicking. You just keep focusing on what you know works and getting better at it and chipping away at the little details of your craft. So you're always improving on what you do. And your probability of being successful over time keeps going up. And I think any smart investor, any smart person that looks at the long picture in life, that's what you want. You want something that has the highest probability of being successful repeatedly, rather than randomly putting together highlight films here and there and being complete disasters in between. It looks nice on headlines, but you don't build careers like that. And you don't build anything that's sustainable, repeatable, or really coachable.
So when I read your book, as I'm reading it, I'm sitting there, the book, Thank You, Coach. I'm sitting there and I'm thinking, yes, he got it. He put down the keys to coaching, the keys to being a successful player. And as importantly, I said, this is what every leader should read. Every investor should read, because the lessons that are in here about the things that make you a good football player, a good football coach, are the same key ingredients that make you a good investor or a good business manager or a good leader of people. And so it transcends sports. And I just thought it was a fantastic job. So you should be, and I'm giving you my opinion here, telling the world, you should be in every company telling people this, coaching the leadership teams, coaching the sales teams, and talking to investors about how there's a process to be driven. What do you talk about what you're doing now and how Thank You, Coach, what that translates to? Because people should be watching your TED Talks. What are you doing from how are you spreading the word of this?
Well, thanks, Mike. I think it starts with good people like you that have taken a chance at reading it, enjoyed it, and connected with me and wanted to discuss it more.
I wish you had more pictures, though. That's my only thing.
Yeah. The children's book's coming out next, Mike.
Okay. I wanted to see some Grey Cup holding.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, but whatever.
What I wanted to do, and thank you for the kind words. My objective in this book was, there's a million books written by leaders on how to lead. There's a million books written by coaches on how to coach. And there's a million books written by athletes on what a great athlete they were. I wanted to write a book that was showcasing the impact great coaching leadership can have on somebody from being that somebody. So I'm speaking back to leaders of how you're impacting people and how the power of your conversation and your interactions with people are going to shape them for positively or negatively. So are you conscious of how you're interacting with these people on an ongoing basis to make sure you're maximizing who they can be? And I wasn't sure where the road of this book would go. I intuitively knew it was bigger than football, but that was my obvious easy entry point. And so I've spoken a lot with coaches and teams here locally, and the word is starting to spread again because of good people like you, where people through the US are starting to reach out and bring me down, but it's starting to, you're right, trickle into the business world where people are realizing this isn't, it may be a book about sports, but it's not a traditional sports book. It's a football story because that's what I have, but it's a story about the power of leadership and how you can shape people. And that's, again, transferable everywhere. I mean, it comes to parenting, teachers, coaches, leaders, managers, everybody. And it also does speak to the power of being open to that leadership from a player or from a person perspective. It takes two people to have that interaction. And I was that guy. So there's power in being open to being led. But I want to get in front of many businesses I can and to help people better maximize the people they work with and make them the best they can be at what they do. But in doing so, allow that to transfer to everything they do in life so they can go home and be a better husband and be a better father and be a better coach of the league's team, because they understand now the power of every interaction you have with someone is leaving them with an impact, and you want to leave them with an impact that makes them better at what they do and makes them better at how they live their life. And to me, that is the ultimate coach. That is the ultimate leader, where you are improving every aspect of someone's life through how you're coaching them with whatever you're doing.
That's pretty cool. When I first saw Dorazio, I assumed it was an Italian background. My family's Italian. I was raised in an Italian household, and then I saw a picture of Dan, and he has another trait. He has another trait that my family has, and I have, is a strong nose. So.
Yeah, he's a Pittsburgh Steel guy. He's a Pittsburgh Steel guy.
Yeah, like he is. Yeah, like a tough guy.
Yeah,
and,
big time.
Are you still in touch with him?
Oh yeah. Dan and I. He was the first person I had to get this book to before it went public. I wanted to make sure I had his blessing. He didn't really know I was writing it. His wife knew.
I was going to say, he must have been like, come on, stop.
I was kind of shocked because I was bouncing a lot of stuff off him, getting some old papers and making sure I was right on his grading systems.
Right.
But he didn't really know because he's so focused on what he does. And I met with him and gave him the first copy, and it was something to see the tears in his eyes that he was blown away. But I think the greatest compliment was, or shall I say, the most powerful thing that for me was to him letting me know he had no idea how much he has impacted me as a person, and
how to make his career, like in terms of it all worth it to know he had an impact.
Yes, and the first two chapters, obviously, one of my good friends, Rob Murphy, was a two-time All-American Ohio State. He wrote one of the openings, and that touched Dan's heart. And our longtime sports psychologist wrote the other one. And it was, it was our way of thanking him, and by extension, thanking all coaches, and then thirdly, reminding all the coaches of the power you have. And I think Dan is so humbled that he knows that I'm out there spreading the word to the world using him as my example. So he's humbled knowing that we're going to hopefully help improve coaching and improve relationships with leaders and their people through the story of me and Dan.
How do people get a hold of you?
I have my own site, Angus Reid, ANGUSREID 64. So AngusReid64.com. You can get me there. I'm on Twitter, AngusReid64. That's probably the easiest ways for the world to reach me now. And I'm very accessible. You get a hold of me through my site. I'm emailing you right back. It's me personally. And I love speaking. I'm starting to build some workshops on trust in the business world and how to create it.
That's it's a good TED talk on trust that you did. I really like that. Yeah.
I appreciate
by the way, you don't look like a 310-pound lineman.
I'm about 80 pounds down now. I'm a normal human being, and that came down to, again, I did what I had to do.
Discipline, right?
Yeah, you learn it. It transfers. Look, and it was discipline to gain those 80 pounds in the first place. So it was just same thing. I did what I had to do to play because it's what I wanted to do, and I'm a stubborn, determined guy. And then when you're done, I got two little sons, and you look at a long life, and you say, okay, now you got to do what you got to do to still be who you need to be for my family now. I don't need to be a 300-pound person anymore. So why are we doing that? Let's commit to doing what you got to do to be who you need to be for the people that matter most.
One of my closest friends played. He was an offensive lineman at Yale. He's in his mid-50s now. And that was when Yale was, they were a top 20 team at the time, and in a different era. And he now probably weighs about 185. And when we're talking, and people say, "Come on, you didn't play football." He's like, "No, I'm telling you, I did." And he has, he'll show no picture, but he said, I want to be healthy again. So it really does. You trim down. I'm seeing a big trend of that too with offensive linemen who are retired, really slimming down.
I think a lot of realities are coming out too about you're starting to see. We're starting to see the guys that played in the 70s and 80s, and a lot of them dying young. I mean, it's not healthy to be 330 pounds for 40 years, right? Yeah. And I think people now are seeing that the reality of being that heavy for that long. So I think the guys that are knowledgeable of it and are able to are doing everything they can because you have families, you have people that rely on you, and you can't just say, "Well, I was an offensive lineman." Yeah, but you're not anymore. Don't. That's an excuse. Don't lean on that to say, I still have to be 350 pounds because I'm a lineman. That was 10 years ago, right? You need to do what you need to do to make sure that you're being the person for as long as possible for the people that need you. And to me, it's it's about being healthy, and it's about being there, and all the injuries that I had, and we're all beat up. The more weight you can lose, the better off you're going to be to live a healthy, happy life after the sport's done.
That's great. Hey man, it was great talking. Really enjoyed it.
Oh, thank you, Mike. It's a pleasure. I'm so happy you reached out, and I'm really glad that we've been communicating lately, and I really am really appreciative of you having me on.
Oh, my pleasure. Well, I hope you enjoyed listening to Angus. Like I said, I don't talk a lot about. Once in a while, I give a book that I read, and I'll mention what I like. And this just really resonated for me. I saw a lot of parallels. Whether you are a business owner, you are a business manager, you're a salesperson, you're an investor. There are a lot of parallels that can be learned from here. And it's not one of, it's not one of these self-help books. It's you're drawing lessons out from reading about an interesting guy and an interesting career, and who wasn't destined to do it. He had to work really hard, and it was the combination of a guy who was wired to want to succeed and a guy who was wired to want to help people succeed. And the book is Thank You, Coach. Angus Reid is the author, and I think it's interesting. So anyway, hope you enjoyed it. And it's going to be like a 2-part series this week. I've got another guest, and he's not an investor, professional investor, but what he does is part of how I think about investing, and it's somebody I've gotten to know and who I have a great deal of respect for, and worked in the corporate world for a long time, and listening to him can make you a better investor. So that's going to come out later in the week. Anyway, thanks for listening. Speak soon. Thanks.
The information presented on Talking Stocks Over a Beer is the opinion of its hosts and guests. You should not base your investment decisions solely on this broadcast. Remember, it's your money and your responsibility.